The main hall of Helix National Bank's North Dearborn branch retained the quiet calm typical of a Thursday morning at the start of the month, soft sunlight filtering down onto the polished marble floor, reflecting the silhouettes of passers-by and the gentle tap of shoes, like the soundtrack of a smoothly running machine. But at exactly 9:58 that morning, an unusual stillness crept into the air as the revolving glass door opened and a man stepped inside. He wore a simple white t-shirt, faded jeans, and old sneakers, nothing that marked him as an important client or someone anyone at the bank would notice. Yet within minutes, his presence would forever change the meaning of power, dignity, and courage within that building. Elijah Monroe, 46, is the CEO of Helix Financial Group, the corporation owning the entire Helix Bank network across the United States. He arrived without an entourage or luxury car, no suit or tie. No one knew that the man quietly standing in line at teller number 3 held 35% of the company's shares and the authority to appoint all senior personnel. The only thing he carried was his own priority customer card and an unwavering determination. In the weeks prior, Elijah's team had received a series of anonymous reports about discrimination against black customers at the North Dearborn branch. Complaints were dismissed as unsubstantiated until one whistleblower posted a line on Reddit, "I just need someone with enough power to come in and see for themselves." Elijah read that at 3 a.m. and had not slept since. When it was his turn, Elijah placed his card and documents on the glass counter. His voice was low, calm, but unwavering under scrutiny. "I want to make a withdrawal, $1 million, wire transfer." Travis Dean, the teller, about 34, glanced at the papers and raised an eyebrow. He didn't check the system or verify anything beyond Elijah's shoes. "You said $1 million?" His tone dripping with mockery. From the back of the line came some snickering laughs. "We need to verify your identity. There have been a few scammers recently dressed like you." Elijah said nothing, just nodded slightly. He was too familiar with such looks of denial before the facts were even checked. Travis hadn't touched the card before, whispering to branch manager Karen Whitmore, 52, who approached with crossed arms and an expression thick with subtle disdain. "You think everyone has $1 million just because they say so?" she said loud enough for the whole hall to hear. Elijah stood still, unmoving, but his eyes that had witnessed hundreds of deals, now carried a sharp, silent warning, something no one in the room noticed until it was too late. Ashley Kramer, another teller, didn't bother to check the account. She took Elijah's card, shoved it into the drawer, and locked it before saying, "This card looks suspicious. Honestly, you didn't steal it, did you?" The room fell silent. A man near the plant whispered, "Did she just say that?" Meanwhile, a woman stood, raised her phone, and began recording. That was the first moment Helix Bank was no longer silent. It was also the moment true power began to speak not through words, but through the cold silence of a man too familiar with being misjudged even within the very home he had built from scratch. As Elijah's eyes rested on the drawer where his ID was being held, his mind was suddenly yanked backward into another stream of time, where memories he thought were long buried returned with a clarity so sharp it hurt. This wasn't the first time he had been treated this way, and deep down, Elijah knew it wouldn't be the last, unless he did something, right here and now. 21 years ago, Elijah had just graduated with a prestigious master's degree in finance, walking into a small bank on the outskirts of Houston with his first approved loan letter in hand. He wore a white shirt and slightly wrinkled slacks from a 40-minute bus ride. In his hand was the guarantee letter for the down payment on his first investment property. But the woman at the counter barely glanced at it and said, "The file needs further review. Come back when you have a lawyer with you." Elijah walked out empty-handed, not because he lacked documents, but because they didn't believe a modestly dressed black man could be asking to withdraw hundreds of thousands of dollars. Another time, when Elijah was 15, he carried a savings bond left to him by his grandmother, hoping to exchange it for cash to buy books for the new school year. But the teller didn't ask anything except, "You're doing this for someone else, right?" Even though Elijah clearly pointed out the sender was his grandmother, complete with her signature, they still refused to process the transaction until she came in person. The way they looked at him, like a poor kid trying to impersonate someone else, still lingered like a slow, deep cut in the fragile trust of his youth. Elijah didn't grow up holding on to anger. He grew up holding on to a vow that he would one day build a place, a system, where people weren't judged by their skin color, their clothes, or the zip code they lived in. Helix was born from that very conviction, and to this day, Elijah still believed in that ideal, even if what was happening in front of him now was testing the very system he had built. Amidst those memories, Elijah's gaze landed on Leah Porter, the young teller who stood frozen, her eyes filled with hesitation, yet showing something deeper conscience. Karen Whitmore, with a voice steeped in the weight of authority accumulated through years of control, turned to Travis and said coldly, "If he doesn't leave, report suspicious activity and prepare to call security." There was no real security at that branch, just a veiled threat used to drive out what they didn't want to confront. Elijah knew that, and he also knew that if he stayed silent, this would keep happening, to people without names, without titles, and without someone there to record the moment. So he reached for his phone, not to film, but to call. "Nina," he said as the signal connected, "activate the internal monitoring system." His assistant's voice came through clearly in his earpiece. "System is live. All audio and video are being recorded. You only need to give the word." Elijah said nothing. Not yet. Any word spoken too soon would come from anger, and anger wasn't what he brought with him today. Instead, he stood still, silent and unmoving, like a mirror, reflecting exactly what the room was revealing: false authority, baseless arrogance, and justification wrapped in a manager's suit. In the space between memory and the present, something within him shifted. It wasn't sorrow. It was resolve. No one was walking out of that room today without knowing the truth. The tension in the air was no longer something people merely sensed intuitively. It had become a thick, invisible mass that clung to every surface of the Helix Bank lobby like a dense fog. Everyone stood still, not out of respect, but frozen by something caught between confusion and disbelief. From the back of the queue, a young woman named Jasmine Lee had begun recording. Her eyes met Elijah's, then flicked to Leah, the only employee showing a genuine, visible unease. Without saying another word, Jasmine lifted her phone, tapped to start recording, and declared in a voice not loud but firm, "This is racism at Helix Bank, at Dershus, and it's going online right now." Seconds later, Tyrell Mason, a journalist who had been at the bank to open a business account, also pulled out his phone. He didn't ask, didn't seek permission, just quietly panned his camera, beginning to document the images he knew would otherwise be denied or erased. "Get his name," Jasmine said softly. "We need all the evidence." Tyrell nodded. At the counter, Leah was trying to maintain composure, but the tight grip of her hand gave everything away. 2 years of working under Karen Whitmore had taught her what to say and what to keep to herself. But today had gone far beyond clerical errors or procedural missteps. This wasn't about a banking dispute. This was institutional humiliation. Leah spoke up, quietly but clearly. "He has a right to be here. By regulation, we cannot freeze a client's card without first verifying the account." Karen spun around, her gaze piercing through Leah like a poisoned needle. "You're paid to work, not to argue." But Leah didn't back down. "I'm paid to follow protocol, and you're violating it." At that moment, Ashley Kramer, the one who had hidden Elijah's card, stepped out from behind the counter, placing both hands on the drawer as if guarding a piece of evidence in a criminal trial. "This card is compromised," she stressed, "and so is this man. We're asking him to leave the premises immediately." Elijah remained motionless, his eyes moving silently from Ashley to Karen to Travis, who was doing everything he could to avoid eye contact. "You're destroying Helix," Elijah said, his voice soft as a breeze but leaving a scar with each word. "This isn't about me anymore. It's about all of you." The words landed like a spark in a room already soaked in gunpowder. A middle-aged man nearby whispered to his wife, "What are they doing? Is this how they treat all black people?" A young woman standing near the ATM gasped, "I can't believe this is still happening in Chicago." And somewhere to the left of the lobby, a woman in a turquoise suit quietly started recording audio, shaking her head with eyes full of rage. The air in the bank lobby was no longer air. It had become a witness, capturing every sound, every glance, every press of a record button, as if the building itself was ashamed of what was unfolding beneath its towering glass dome. But none of that compared to what was about to happen next, when Elijah Monroe's true identity would begin to surface, slowly, like dawn breaking through the blinds of arrogance and indifference that had stayed drawn for far too long. No one in the Helix Bank lobby that morning could pinpoint the exact moment the shift began. Perhaps it was in the look Leah gave as she stepped forward, positioning herself between Elijah and Travis, a fragile line between dignity and decay. Or maybe it was in Tyrell's quiet gesture as he bent down, pulled open the drawer behind the teller's station, and read the name printed on the card aloud, Elijah Monroe. The sound echoed like a declaration, forcing the entire room to confront the truth. Karen froze for a beat. Then, as if someone had ripped the mask off her face, she turned to Ashley and whispered just loud enough for Leah to hear, "Lock it. Don't let anyone touch that card." Ashley immediately pressed her hand down on the drawer as though guarding a classified file. "This card is suspicious," she repeated, clinging to the excuse like a chant. "And so is this man. We've already asked him to leave. This is your final warning." Karen's voice no longer carried mere hostility, but a deeper rage, the kind born from losing control. But Elijah didn't move. He stood like a pillar, not out of defiance, but for justice. "I came here to withdraw from my own account," he said calmly. "You took away that right, insulted me, and are now attempting to force me out with intimidation." Leah had had enough. "This is abuse of power," she said, this time meeting Karen's eyes without flinching. "You're openly violating bank policy." Karen clenched her jaw, stepping closer, her words seething through gritted teeth. "I warned you once. If you keep siding with him, you'll be next." But Leah didn't back down. "I've seen you do this before," she said louder now, loud enough for several customers to glance over. "Last year, a black customer came in for a loan consultation. You made him wait over an hour, then rejected him without even opening his file." The room dropped into a dense silence. An older customer whispered to the person next to them, "They did the same thing to me once, froze my account for no reason." A woman in a gray coat nodded. "My father switched banks because he got tired of having to prove he was decent enough to be helped." And Tyrell, still live streaming, turned the camera toward the growing crowd. "This is no longer an isolated incident," he said into the lens. "This is the clear signature of a broken system, where those in power believe they can define a person's worth by glances and bias." Elijah listened quietly, his gaze now no longer on those who had hurt him, but on those who stood up, Leah, Tyrell, Jasmine, and the customers who were beginning to murmur their truths. A current was forming not from anger but from awakening. When Leah took one more step toward Ashley, her voice no longer trembled. "Give him back the card, or I'll escalate this entire incident through the internal reporting system." Karen cut in, "I am the internal system." But this time Elijah turned to her, his voice even and cold. "Not for much longer." That was the moment everyone understood. The ground had shifted. This was no longer a withdrawal dispute. This was a reckoning between a disregarded leader and a culture running on careless arrogance. And for the first time that morning, Karen could no longer hide behind her false authority. Before anyone could catch their breath, the name Elijah Monroe had already begun to ripple through earbuds, phone screens recording in real time, and hushed whispers of stunned customers in the lobby. But it wasn't until Tyrell repeated it, his voice clear and deliberate, "Elijah Monroe, CEO of Helix Capital," that the entire space seemed to stop moving. No one spoke. No one stepped. The remaining bank employees, including Travis and Ashley, stood frozen like statues. Karen, in that moment, could only retreat half a step, her lips parting as if to object, but no words came that could withstand the earthquake that had just been unleashed. Elijah didn't need to confirm anything. He simply stood there, a man in a plain white t-shirt with no badge, no business card, yet suddenly becoming the center of gravity in the room. Leah turned toward him, eyes wide, and though she had suspected it before, the truth still hit her with undeniable force. Karen managed a faltering question, her voice barely audible. "What's your name?" Elijah didn't look at her. He turned toward Tyrell and replied, "He just said it. The problem is, none of you were listening." The silence broke with a sharp gasp. Ashley stepped back, still pressing her hand against the drawer, but staring at Elijah as if she had seen a ghost. Travis, who had said nothing until now, muttered under his breath, "No way." But it was Leah who shattered the fragile illusion with the weight of truth, her voice steady and deliberate, like a verdict being read aloud. "This is the chief executive officer of Helix Capital, the parent company of this branch." And just like that, the board was flipped. All eyes now turned not to Elijah as a suspect, but to Karen, the very person who, just minutes earlier, had ordered him out of the building he himself owned. The words she had spoken, the accusations, the insults, the baseless decisions now formed the cracks in her own armor. From the back of the room, a male customer stepped forward with resolve and nodded. "If he's forced out of here, I'll be the first to walk out with him." A woman in a purple wool coat added immediately, "I'm going too." And so it began, a line forming not for deposits or withdrawals, but to become a wall of people standing between Elijah and the very hands that had just tried to cast him out of the space he had built. Karen tried to regain control of the room. "Everyone, please remain calm. This situation has been misunderstood." But her voice no longer carried weight. Elijah looked directly at her, his voice low and precise like a scalpel. "It's not because I'm the CEO that you were wrong. It's because you were wrong that me being CEO makes it undeniable." Then he turned back to Leah, eyes meeting hers still wet with restrained emotion. "You didn't stand up for me because of my title. You stood up for what was right, and that's what earned my trust." Silence settled once again, but it was no longer suffocating. It was a stillness of anticipation, of something deeper, something stronger the moment Karen Whitmore would realize that what she was losing wasn't just a customer, but her entire career. Karen struggled to stay upright, but the weight of the stairs, customers, employees, cameras, and most of all, Elijah's tightened every vessel in her body. The authority she once believed was unshakable was now cracking beneath her feet like a sheet of ice splintering under the weight of truth. Still, she didn't yield. In a burst of desperation, Karen clenched her teeth and shouted, "This is impersonation! He's just putting on an act!" No one answered. No one believed her. And that silence was the cruelest answer of all. Elijah didn't raise his voice. He simply pulled out his phone again and said firmly, "Nina, confirm executive authority." His assistant's voice echoed from the speaker, calm and precise like a final verdict being read. "Executive authority confirmed. Internal protocol has been activated. Account verified. Elijah Monroe, Chief Executive Officer, full authority over Helix Chicago branch under Clause 9B. The atmosphere in the room wavered. A few employees collapsed into their chairs. Travis gripped the counter as if trying to disappear into it. Ashley let go of the drawer, her lips trembling. Elijah turned to Leah. There was no arrogance in his eyes, only sincerity as he said, "You stood up when no one else would. I need people like you." Then he looked to Karen. "And I don't need people like you." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle before continuing. "Effective immediately, suspend Karen Whitmore, Travis Bell, and Ashley Kramer from their positions. Revoke system access. Temporarily halt all branch operations." Nina's voice responded without delay. "Order confirmed. Revoking personnel access. Account oversight temporarily transferred to regional compliance. Internal audit procedures have commenced." In less than 10 seconds, the computer screen behind Karen went dark. Transaction windows closed as if the entire bank system itself had chosen to reject those who once ran it. "You can't do this!" Karen screamed, but the computers remained silent, the system no longer recognizing her. Elijah didn't need to respond. He turned to the crowd. "I didn't come here today to test anyone. I came to see with my own eyes. And now I've seen who crumbles under the weight of power and who stands tall for what is right." Leah was still stunned, but her eyes no longer held fear. They reflected trust in fairness, in righteousness, and in a model of leadership she had never seen in real life. Elijah turned to her once more. "You're going to help me rebuild this branch, starting today." The customers applauded, not the loud, rowdy kind, but a slow, steady rhythm of recognition, of gratitude, and of hope that in a world where power too often walks hand in hand with abuse, there are still those who choose to act with dignity. When the applause faded, a new silence settled over the bank, not one born of fear, but of the shared understanding that what had just happened was only the beginning. Elijah didn't smile, didn't gloat. He stood there, phone still in hand, listening as Nina reported. "The first live news broadcast has aired. The video recorded by Tyrell Mason is going viral. Internal PR is prepared to respond. The board has granted full authority for resolution." Elijah didn't respond immediately. He simply looked deep into the room, where every gaze now fixed on him not with suspicion, but with expectation. And then, as if the stream of truth could no longer be held back, Ryan, a remaining teller, barely 26, slowly raised his hand. He swallowed hard, then stepped toward Elijah, his hands trembling but his eyes steady. "Mr. Monroe, there's something you need to know." Elijah nodded for him to speak. Ryan took a breath, then spoke in a single flow, as if afraid he might lose courage if he paused. "Since last fall, Ms. Karen gave us an unofficial directive, called it client filtering. Nothing in writing, but we all knew what she meant. Anyone who didn't dress the part, didn't speak like investors, especially people of color, they were to be scrutinized more closely, sometimes delayed, sometimes outright denied." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. An older woman nearby whispered, "No surprise. They made me verify 3 times just to withdraw $200. Elijah's expression didn't change, but his eyes shifted toward Travis, who was still avoiding contact, then to Ashley, whose face had turned pale. "Did you know about this?" he asked. Both stayed silent, as if hoping someone would rescue them. Ryan turned back, voice strained but firm. "We heard, and we did it. I'm not saying this to avoid blame. I'm saying it because it was wrong." Elijah gave a small nod, then turned to his phone. "Nina, open the internal complaint records at the Chicago branch from 2020. Cross-reference with shift schedules and manager sign-offs." Nina's voice came steady as always. "Processing confirming 3 complaints from Black and Asian clients showing delayed service with no recorded follow-up. Internal files not saved, but system history indicates they were once accessed." Elijah lowered his voice, each word carving into the space like stone. "So they were deleted." Nina replied without hesitation. "Confirmed." This was no longer speculation. No longer the fault of a few individuals. This was systemic, a network of compromise, silence, and cover-up. Elijah looked to the crowd, then stepped forward, his voice drawing everyone into a shared stance. "We're not going to fix a broken system. We're going to rebuild it, from the ground up." Then he turned to Leah, his tone softening but resolute. "I want you to audit every blocked application since 2020. Every complaint that was ignored, I want it reread, and if necessary, apologized for." Leah nodded, and for the first time her eyes didn't just reflect resistance, but commitment. The crowd remained silent, but the atmosphere no longer carried the weight of anger. Instead, it was stunned by the sheer scope of the truth unfolding before them. Elijah didn't need to persuade anyone. All he had to do was show them what had truly happened and let them choose which side they stood on. The exposure of systemic misconduct had shattered the last layer of Karen's confidence. She no longer screamed, no longer objected, no longer tried to flee. She simply stood there, arms limp at her sides, her face pale as if she had just heard a sentence pronounced not by a judge, but by her own conscience. Yet Elijah didn't leave. He remained not to seek revenge, but to ensure that each individual confronted the responsibility they had chosen to avoid. Unexpectedly, from the corner of the room, a young man, Rashad, a teller with just 8 months on the job, raised his hand. His voice was quiet but clear, every word steady. "Mr. Monroe, I also knew about an unspoken policy." Elijah turned, giving him a small nod to continue. "They called it soft screening. If a customer had an unfamiliar last name or didn't speak perfect English, we were told to send them for document review, even if everything was in order. We weren't allowed to write it down, just received verbal instructions from above. But I didn't speak up. I was afraid of losing my job." Elijah didn't scold him. He didn't smile, didn't console. He simply walked quietly over to the young man and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Fear is understandable, but silence is a choice. And today, you chose what's right." He turned to Nina through the phone. "I want every Helix branch reviewed for complaint records over the past 24 months. Anyone who was labeled high risk without clear basis should be listed. And I want a new policy. Any complaint involving discrimination, direct or indirect, must go straight to the independent investigative unit. No intermediaries." "Understood," Nina replied. "The board has approved deployment of the new internal review framework, and the video from this morning's incident has surpassed 3 million views. Civil rights monitoring groups have started to get involved." Elijah took a deep breath, not out of concern for the media, but because of the weight of truth now set in motion. This was no longer an internal matter. It had become a call to reform a system that once claimed to be civilized, yet had rotted from within. Leah stepped forward, handing Elijah a printed report and early extraction of the data. She spoke softly. "There have been more than 60 overlooked complaints in just 18 months. Most came from minority groups and the elderly." Elijah nodded, his eyes never leaving the page. Then he looked directly at the crowd. "We cannot ask customers to trust us if we are the first to deny their dignity. Starting today, Helix will not just change its procedures, we will change our mindset. And if anyone in this room cannot treat others with the same respect as they would their own family, it's time to walk away." In the air, now thick with accountability, Karen raised her head one last time. She slowly stepped forward to stand before Elijah, not to defend herself, not to ask for forgiveness, just to whisper, "I used to think you didn't deserve to walk into this place, but I was wrong." Elijah didn't reply, because in his eyes at that moment, every word had already been said through action, through confrontation, and through his refusal to be just another silent accomplice like so many leaders before him. That day, Elijah didn't leave the Helix Chicago branch immediately after the decisions were made. He sat down not in the executive chair, but in a worn leather seat by the client area, as if to imprint every detail into memory. The gray carpet that had caught his shoe as he was shoved back, the cold stone wall his back had pressed against, Leah's anxious eyes, and the soft murmur of phones recording throughout the lobby. In that moment, Elijah understood that if no one had the courage to stand up, the truth would forever be buried beneath a fabricated culture called procedure. He turned on his phone and connected directly with the board office. David's voice, the longest-serving member, came through the speaker. "You acted outside of protocol, Elijah. But this time, maybe it was what needed to be done." Elijah didn't argue. He simply said, "We built a financial empire but forgot the most vital part, human dignity. From now on, that empire must have a heart." After a brief silence, David replied, "You have full authority to shape that, and you're not alone." A week later, 3 Helix branches in Houston, San Diego, and Atlanta were placed under review. Over 20 personnel left their positions not because they were punished, but because the transparency of the new system forced them to confront their past conduct. There was no grand press conference. No one stood in a suit before cameras to apologize on anyone's behalf. Elijah simply sent an internal memo across the Helix system. "We are not just numbers. We are a financial institution built to serve people, not prejudice. Starting today, silence is no longer a safe choice. Leah, now head of the Internal Integrity Unit, was given full authority to oversee all cases involving discrimination. In the first week, she received 86 previously ignored complaints resubmitted by clients, each accompanied by a note. This time, we hope someone is truly listening. Elijah ordered that each person who had filed a complaint be called not with a template apology letter, but with a real conversation. In a closed meeting with regional directors, Elijah never raised his voice. He simply asked, "If I hadn't been the CEO, if that day it had been an elderly man with brown skin or a woman wearing a headscarf, what would have happened? And why have we come to see that as normal?" The room went silent. No one answered, but everyone understood it wasn't just a rebuke. It was a mirror, and a line had been drawn. From then on, the equitable contact policy was launched across the system. All staff were required to undergo regular training, not only on professional skills, but on awareness and mindset. Each branch had an immediate response team, including both new employees and customers, granted the right to challenge service decisions. Helix was no longer the same bank, and when someone asked Elijah, "Aren't you afraid of losing market trust?" he simply replied, "Real trust doesn't need to be shielded by words. It is built through action." 3 months after the incident at the Helix Chicago branch, the digital marquee outside the headquarters of Helix Financial Group in New York no longer displayed stock figures as usual. Instead, a quiet line of text scrolled across a white background. "Not everyone needs to be seen to be worthy of trust." No logo, no CEO's name, just a message soft as wind, heavy as legacy. Elijah stayed mostly out of the spotlight. He declined dozens of interview requests, gave no press statements, launched no PR campaign. When asked why, he simply smiled and said, "True change doesn't lie in the stories we tell, but in the patterns that no longer repeat." Still, he was seen in closed-door meetings with community advisory groups, in regular listening sessions with staff, and in the first training classes for new branch directors, where he always sat in the back row, quietly observing. At the Chicago branch, Leah had completely restructured the space. Teller counters were lowered to eye level, with no partitions. The back wall now held a black and white photograph of an outstretched hand not asking for identity, only asking what was needed. Beneath the image was a small quote, barely visible unless one stepped closer. "How you treat those who can offer you nothing is the truest portrait of who you are." Elijah visited the branch one early winter morning unannounced. Dressed in a simple gray wool coat, he sat in the waiting area like any other client. When Leah walked out, they only nodded, no words needed. She handed him a report, number of resolved complaints, apologies made, and a list of 14 customers who had once been denied service now returned, with words of thanks. Elijah didn't read it in detail. He simply asked, "Was anyone still unhappy?" Leah nodded. "Yes." One person said, "I just wish it had come sooner." Elijah exhaled slowly. "Then we came at the right time." That evening, he sat alone in his office on the 42nd floor, watching the stream of people moving through the streets below. On his desk sat a small wooden box. He opened it. Inside was the old bank card, the one Karen had once confiscated. Its edges were worn, its surface scratched, but it had never broken. He ran a finger across it, as if touching a memory he wished to preserve, not because of the pain, but because it had awakened an entire system. And in the year-end internal newsletter sent to every Helix employee, Elijah made no mention of the incident, no talk of firings or reforms. He wrote only a short passage, titled, "When no one sees you, be the one who sees others." It was the message he chose to close a turbulent chapter and also the one to open a new journey, where courage doesn't come from title but from how we choose to treat each other when no one is watching. Because in a world full of judging eyes and invisible hierarchies, the quiet presence of integrity is the most powerful act of all. From the perspective of an expert in organizational leadership and culture, I have always believed that the true test of a leader doesn't lie in how they handle crisis, but but in how they confront the quiet deviations that silently take root within the very systems they build. Elijah Monroe chose the harder path to listen, to face things head-on, and to act, never letting title overshadow character. And it is precisely that quiet, awakened resolve that has redefined the meaning of power, not as something imposed from above, but as something awakened from within. If today's story made you reflect on justice, on presence, or on doing what is right even when no one is demanding it, then please like this video to help spread that message further. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can continue to walk with us through stories that reveal the shadows and reignite the light within organizations. And if you believe that silence is never neutral, leave a comment with the phrase, "Choose integrity," because change begins with a choice, and that choice could be yours right now.